All right, council member, we are ready to go.
All right, can you hear me, Paul?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Welcome everybody to our Transportation Committee meeting for January 5th. As I told Paul earlier, everything old is new again. So we're back to being virtual. I'm going to read our script that's been approved to just update everybody on how we're going to do this once again. Because of the surge of COVID cases as a result of the Omicron variant, we have elected to temporarily resume online meetings in the interest of public safety. We will therefore be using that public comment procedure that we commenced in the summer of 2020, which we based on guidance from the Louisiana Attorney General. As a refresher to the public, here are the public comment rules that we will follow today. At the beginning of the meeting, council staff will read the agenda for today's meeting in its entirety. That agenda is also online at council.nola.gov. We will then pause our meeting to allow citizens to submit written comments for any agenda item. Anyone wishing to comment should go to council.nola.gov and fill out an online public comment form. Only written public comments will be accepted. Public comment will be limited to 1 comment per person per item. Comments should also be limited to 2 minutes when read aloud and be germane to the agenda item at hand. Public comment will be closed at the end of the public comment break. We will not accept any written comment beyond that point. After the public comment, we will take up the agenda before voting on the agenda item. Council staff will read any public comment received for that item. So with that, I'll turn it over to y'all to read the agenda in its entirety. Paul, who's going to read? Is it Cherie?
I will read it. Just pulling it up now. Thank you. For the Transportation Committee meeting of January 5th, 2022, the agenda is as follows. 1, roll call. 2, approval of the minutes from the September 29th, 2021 meeting. 3, RTA infrastructure and grants updates. Lona Edwards-Hankins, Deputy CEO of Planning and Infrastructure, Regional Transit Authority. 4, New Orleans Parklets Program. Jeffrey Schwartz, Director of Economic Development, City of New Orleans. 5, New Orleans Pedicabs Program. 6, adjournment.
Great. So now we're going to move to the public comment period. I don't think we need to vote on this. And that we're going to adjourn for 30 minutes. Is that correct, Paul?
It's because it's a committee meeting and I don't believe there'll be a vote taken today, will there?
No.
I don't believe there are any voting items. We can limit it. We can do about 10 minutes for the public. I'm sorry, 15 minutes for the public comment break.
Perfect. All right. Well, so we're going to recess for 15 minutes. So if any public is out there, please feel free to submit a public comment card and we will resume at, Paul, why don't you give us a time?
10:21 a.m.
Okay, great. So I'll see y'all at 10:21 a.m. Thank you.
Councilmember, it's been 15 minutes, so we are ready whenever you are.
Can you hear me? Thank you. Paul? Oh, good. Let's see. We got Councilmember Nguyen here. We've got Councilmember Glapion. So let's go ahead and dig right into the agenda. So first, we have approval of the minutes from the September 29th, 2021 meeting. Do I have a motion?
So move.
Moved by Councilmember Nguyen. Do I have a second? Second by Councilmember Glapion. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Any nays? No nays. Let's move on. Next, I'm excited about this. We've got Miss Lona Hankins. Hey, Lona, how are you? Good to see you, even though if it's not in person. We've heard some exciting news from the RTA in terms of some new grants that they've been receiving, especially in terms of having a transit center that I think we've all been, this has been on the books for many, many years. So Lona, if you don't mind, I'd love just to turn it over to you. I know you have a presentation. Paul, are you able to pull that up? Great.
Good morning, council members.
Good morning,
community. So I'm going to give you a kind of a rundown on where we are on our grants and where we are on our capital projects. Next slide. So the RTA was recently awarded $18 million in a federal raise grant. And these funds will be used to do two things. One, to replace all of our fare technology, both the infrastructure and hardware. So lots of major cities, when you get on their transit, you can use tap cards, you can use refillable credit cards, tap cards, you can use your phones, as well as pay with cash. And our hardware was put in before Katrina. So our goal is to update all of our hardware as well as modernize the application, the mobile app that is currently used, such that it is more user-friendly and in line with what modern technology is.
So Lona, will this hardware improvement be on all modes of transit, from the streetcar to the buses to the ferries?
Yes. We're actually have a project ongoing right now to get fare technology on the ferries. That will hopefully be in place in the next 6 weeks or so. So we will have fare technology on the ferry, and then this grant will modernize everything and update everything.
And so that's going to also allow people to transfer with more ease, correct? Because there's been an issue with that.
Correct. The other component of this grant is to allow for, as we re-envision the system and are going to be implementing New Links thinks about regional and neighborhood transfer points. So I'm going to use the intersection of Carrollton and Claiborne as an example. That intersection is not readily user-friendly for pedestrians. You have buses on both sides of Claiborne Avenue. You have a streetcar there. And so how do we make sure that that intersection is now safe for pedestrians? So our goal is to work with DPW, work with the State Department of Transportation to create potentially, we can't move the streetcar track, but we could have the buses all move to one side of that intersection rather than someone trying to cross Claiborne Avenue to catch Jet or the RTA. So our goal is to move all the buses to one side, but to work with the State Department of Transportation. The other, there are several locations. There's the Almonaster location that envisions a regional transfer for station where our high use is. And as we redesign the network to stay within the neighborhoods and only a few buses to leave the neighborhood and come downtown, we're going to create really nice shelters and transfer points as well as comfort stations for our drivers, because currently our drivers are running into McDonald's and other places to take care of their needs. Next slide. And then in 2021, we applied for, and this is all the list of all of the competitive grants that we've applied for and what we've received. So we've received $25 million in highly competitive grants. A small grant to replace all of our non-revenue vehicles. We're going to be upgrading our supervisor vehicles, as well as some of the other shared fleet to hybrid vehicles, and then replacing many of our utility vehicles. And then we also received a $5.35 million grant to begin to electrify our fleet. And so we think we can build our infrastructure for battery charging stations, as well as a couple of buses to put on one route. Now, this grant was written where we would look at the routes that we could reduce the emissions, therefore improving and reducing the potential incidence of asthma. So therefore we can improve attendance rate at school and at jobs. So we have the data around emissions and the health data, and we're going to overlay that to figure out what routes and where it makes sense to put our first electric line on.
Lona, not to interrupt, and this is really exciting, but we saw I've seen in other cities when they have shelters for the buses to pull in, and they're solar. So it actually provides, as you know, shade for the buses, which makes it less energy. You have to expend less energy to start air conditioning them because they're in the shade. And then they also then put solar panels on all the awnings. And that's just been a really great another power source generation for the transit authorities. Is that something that y'all are looking at? Because you do have large areas for bus parking.
So I'll talk about that a little bit at that next area of persistent poverty grant. And then, of course, I just talked about the bus transit. So the grant that we applied for areas of persistent poverty, as you recall, we applied and received this grant in 2020, and we're using that grant to study bus rapid transit. This particular application, we're looking at the 4 or 5 high use routes, and then how can we make those routes safer, and how can we improve the amenities? And we're looking to partner with some of our local institutions on how do we build shelters locally, as well as working on the alternative. Could we use solar to power? Could we use solar or create community benefits by creating charging stations, so that, like we found when Ida hit, maybe perhaps a transit rider or the general public can come charge their phone. So we're looking at those sorts of community benefits while we're building out our infrastructure. So then the other grant that we applied for is the Algiers Point landing, to be able to replace that landing barge, and then requested federal funds to assist us with dry docking some vessels. And then, of course, the Downtown Transit Center, our board approved the location of building a transit center at the corner of Canal and Basin, where the old rail center was before the 50s. And we've asked for $18.9 million in federal funds to help us build that. These 3 grants we submitted the last quarter of the year, so I anticipate hearing back from the federal government in the first or early second quarter.
Is the infrastructure bill that not failing? Is that going to hurt our chances?
This is part of the
I know it's separate, but did you have like a plan out for even more money?
So the infrastructure bill or the Build Back Better bill?
The Build Back Better bill.
These funds are part of the the formula, competitive formulas that we get, that's part of the infrastructure bill that was passed. In the Build Back Better, we are dreaming of transit-oriented communities.
Okay.
That's what would help happen with the Build Back Better.
Okay.
And then we've also approached the state. We had some ideas with Katrina Rita CDBG. We've asked them for roughly 30 million. However, and this is tied to if they had money left over for Katrina Rita, and rather than risking it on a construction project, we believe we have a viable project in replacing our fleet. Because if you recall, unlike construction projects, when FEMA declared something completely damaged, they only gave the RTA the remaining life value, not the complete replacement cost value. So our fleet was hindered and has been hindered. And so because we can buy buses within 6 months or so, it's a 6-month turnaround, as the state, as other applicants begin to close out projects and they have, 100,000, 50,000, whatever it is left, we, the RTA, believe we can help the state spend every last bit of their Katrina Rita dollars in the timeline needed. So we're working with them. They like it. They've said that they have not 30 yet, but they do have an allocation for us, and we're going to be working with them to get some buses on the street.
That's smart, really smart move.
And
then last but not least is for our, because the state, we are in, have a CEA with the state to operate the ferries, we're asking the state for a capital outlay to replace the maintenance barges down at the Lower Algiers terminal. And roughly 10.6, and we put that in this year's capital outlay. It's the first time I think we've done that. So we'll see how we fare with that. Next slide. So I'm going to shift into our capital projects update. As you guys know, we've returned the Canal Streetcar back to service as a result of the Hard Rock collapse. Next slide.
I'm sorry, Lorna, real quick. Is there reimbursable money for the expenses? Where is that right now?
We're working with attorneys on all of that.
Do we have a timeline? Do we know?
I don't know what the timeline of the lawsuit is.
Do you have an amount of what the Hard Rock collapse has cost the RTA?
I don't have that amount handy. I can get that to you. Next slide. The rampart will take us a little bit longer. We had some poles that were long lead items. We've ordered them. They should be in the first quarter. We anticipate bidding that project again in the first quarter of this year. And then because we don't know the extent of the damage along Rampart Street, once we get to the underground and start to be able to do some underground forensic work, we'll know whether or not it's a December 2022 return to service or if it will be sooner. Next slide. The Riverfront Streetcar repair, it was some track work as well as some pole painting. We are wrapping that repair up and actually doing our safety checks and tests. So we anticipate this line coming on service mid-January, quite possibly with the January pick, which happens like January 15th. So we're thinking around the middle of the month, we'll be back in service on the Riverfront Streetcar line. There are some shelters along Riverfront Streetcar that we're trying to figure out if we have funding left in this particular funding source to do some physical improvements, lighting, improve the shelters, just so we can deter some of the activities that's been occurring along the riverfront. Next slide. So the downtown streetcar loop, we are about 30 to 40% complete. We did this project in phases. So you can see the blue phase was done last year or year before last in phase 1. We've completed the green section, which is phase 2. we're currently working on the red section. So our goal was to look at what was going to be impacted by Mardi Gras, knock that out. While the red section is not actually on the Mardi Gras route, it is adjacent to it. So we are working with our contractor to make sure if we're not complete by Mardi Gras, that we have a good safety plan in place such that when they are tearing up the tracks, they make sure that they cover it so that it's not a tripping hazard. And then there's one additional phase 3 that we're working on to figure out if we have enough funding. We get formula grants from the federal government every year for a rail maintenance. And we're trying to figure out if we got enough in this year's allocation to do this work in 2022, or if it'll have to go to 2023.
Is it, Lauren, speaking of the downtown streetcar, is there still a priority there in looking at creating that linkage on Howard Avenue to the UPT?
I need to get back with you on that. I know the planners are looking at that. I don't know if that's part of our BRT study or if that's part of the New Link study.
Okay, because I know there is a phase 1 environmental already done on that. And my understanding was instead of spending time expanding streetcar lines, that we should focus on making the existing streetcars more efficient and tying them into each other. And so obviously, if you tied in the Howard Avenue to UPT and the Loyola line, that you gain more efficiency within the entire system. Same with the linkage from the riverfront streetcar down Elysian Fields to the North Rampart, obviously, and St. Claude, which is obviously not running right now, but that we should focus our energies not necessarily on expansion, but on making the existing streetcars more efficient.
Yeah, well, part of that is also being looked at as part of the bus rapid transit study and what route we take, because you know, bus BRT is much more efficient and financially cost effective because you don't have to lay track than it is to do anything related to the tracks.
Right. No, and I agree with that. I thought that was for expansion. This is talking about focusing on the efficiency of an existing line.
Yeah, let me get back with you on that efficiency question. I know our planners are, you know, prioritizing the biggest bang for the buck, and right now that's BRT.
Right, and I thought the biggest bang for the buck of BRT would be something like along 2-lane Avenue, or those kinds of larger scale connections that currently aren't as efficient as they could be.
Yeah, we have multiple high corridors that they're looking at. This particular study is looking from New Orleans East to the West Bank, and how do we make that move more rapidly?
Great, excellent. All
Next
right.
slide.
Well, Lona, I was just going to say that in terms of y'all's priorities and spending and going after grants, your priorities are much more aligned, I feel, with the public needs and necessities than what we've seen in the past when the management was under a different system. And so I just want to say that I really appreciate what you and the board are doing. And I think that's a whole nother aspect of bringing a lot of the management of the RTA back in-house, is that it really has shown a reflection of where y'all going for the grants and how that is really part of the value system and where we can get the most bang for our buck for the public.
Yeah, I think we are grounded in equity and grounded in really looking at how we use the data that even others are using to improve the quality of life of folks. Some of the spatial justice issues we've zoned into recently about, you know, quality of life in our most needed areas.
Yeah, and I think having a transfer station on Basin really speaks to that. That's something that people don't understand. I mean, it's just horrific when you still drive down and look on Elks Place and see what that looks like versus where we really should be putting our investment, which is in our people and in really good, smart transit section areas that can make people's journeys a lot better.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. It's taken a lot of conversations, but finally some action on that. And so it's really exciting to see that. Council members, do y'all have any questions or comments for Lona?
I don't, Miss Lona, not at this time.
I do think we have a couple public comments. Is that true?
Yes, good morning, Madam Chair. Can you hear me? Okay?
Yes, Sherry, how are you? Good morning.
Happy New Year. We just have one comment on the RTA item from K. Brad Ott, representing himself. Thank you for the Regional Transit Authority service update. While I am encouraged with the resumption of service and upgrades to the Canal Street Ferry, us residents and business proprietors in Algiers are disproportionately impacted with service interruptions and curtailments of the ferry. Additionally, had the RTA and/or the City Council ever considered reinstitution of free ferry service for pedestrians and bicycle commuters to and from Algiers? Such a status that was enjoyed just 10 years ago could act as a significant economic development and quality of life enhancement for Algiers residents and business proprietors. Please consider doing away with tolls upon pedestrians and bicycle commuters, just as motorist commuters already enjoy crossing the Mississippi River to and from New Orleans, West Bank of Algiers.
Thank you so much. Lona, you want me to answer that one for you so y'all don't have to talk about that? But I think we all know that public transit has a cost to it. It was very unfortunate and very short-sighted of the state and certain elected officials that pushed for the removal of the tolls on the Mississippi River Bridge. For the public that do not understand, that money went towards having more sustainable transportation options for the general public, including underwriting the costs of the ferry, which is why the ferry was free. Any public transportation is not going to be sustainable if there's not revenue generation from it. With that being said, however, what is collected at the fare box does not even come close to what it costs to operate the ferries or the buses. It is, in fact, is my understanding that the only one that does make money is, I think, this St. Charles Streetcar. Other than that, everything it operates, it has to be subsidized. That is how public transit operates, and that is how it's going to continue to operate. For those of you who don't think that's smart, we should also recognize that this federal government and the state also subsidizes vehicles, gas, streets. So this is no different from public transit than from private transit. Yes, we all loved it. I also used it quite frequently when it was free with my children, but unfortunately, that is not sustainable. And we had to put a fare on the ferry. We did that my first term, or else we would have lost the ferry. And so I think that's something that that we have to continue. I will say that that the RTA, under the new leadership and the board, has been very smart when it comes to not just the app, but also we have a new fare structure that is going to allow tying in from the ferry into the buses at Canal and the streetcars. And we will, and with these new infrastructure programs that Lona talked about, I think it's going to make the entire system much more user-friendly, and then allow more people to buy into the system, which will allow for greater service. And I think that's what we're all anticipating. Lona, I'm sorry, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you captured it eloquently.
We fought that battle many times. So we have to make sure we have a sustainable transportation system for everybody. And so unfortunately, that means we have to have something at the fare box. But I also have fought for many years on having a reduced fare for our youth and our elderly, and y'all are doing that. And so that's also very exciting. And obviously we would love to get a free youth card for all youth under the age of 24, which I think again would be a wonderful model, because that also then increases the ridership when they age out of that, and it makes people utilize public transit much more freely. So Lona, thank you so much for your work. It's been wonderful. It's been wonderful watching what you're doing over there at the RTA, and I just want to thank you for your service. It really is paying off dividends.
Thank you very much, Kristen.
All right. Next, it's all about transit today. Jeffrey Schwartz is here with the New Orleans Parklets program. So we all know this is something near and dear to my heart that I was advocating for before we even had COVID. And so it was great to see that y'all have implemented the program. And so I know we want to make it permanent. Before it was a program that we had to do a pilot to see how it would work. And Jeffrey, you're under your leadership, y'all have done phenomenal. So if you would like to talk about it and give us an update in that presentation, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmer. And I'll just take a point of personal privilege and also just celebrate those wins with the RTA. It's incredibly exciting to see those investments in the transit system, which are integral to the health and vitality of our economy and our city. So it's really exciting. Great work, Lona and council member. Yes, I think there's a brief slide deck that we put together just to kind of walk us through kind of where we are and where we're going with Parklets. So I'll just wait for that to get fired up. Awesome. Thank you so much. So yes, Councilmember Palmer, thank you and your colleagues so much for championing this work. We've said it a number of times, but it's really exciting to see a reimagining of public space in the city and how we can achieve multiple benefits by sort of rethinking what the public right-of-way can be. As we really ponder not just life during the pandemic with COVID, but also coming out of it. How do we make this permanent, and how do we make this a fixture in our streetscape going forward? So again, just in terms of agenda today, we can go to the next slide. I'll briefly go over some of the goals that we had when we initially did this, and also what we're thinking about as we move this program forward. Talk a little bit about the pilot and kind of how that pilot program has unfolded, how many businesses participated and the like. And then a quick discussion about how we move towards, as you noted, council member, moving towards implementation on the permanent program and what next steps are required for that. We can go to the next slide. When we started this program, we really had a number of goals, right? The idea with this, as with any policy change, is really to achieve multiple outcomes, not just focus on one. And we really see this work at the intersection of economic development, supporting our business community, and also thinking about not just businesses, but also the wider communities that businesses sit in. And so we always had a lens where we were thinking about this in the context of transportation and health, right? And that was particularly poignant during COVID when so much of this, the groundwork of this was really laid by how we were going to be meeting the needs of our communities, our residents, our businesses during the pandemic. And so there are really four related outcomes that we were striving for. First and foremost, we were striving to support the vibrancy of our business community. We wanted to make sure that, especially with the occupancy restrictions that we saw throughout COVID, wanted to make sure that those were, had as little impact as possible on businesses. And so creating some additional space for them to operate in a safe way was of paramount importance. The second is this wider complete streets conversation that council member, I know you've been a part of for many years now. The city and many of my colleagues who have helped lead this program in the mayor's office of transportation and safety and permits and public works. Really this goal of how do we create streets that are not just for automobiles. We recognize the importance of cars and personal mobility, but also, as we were just talking about, the importance of pedestrians and cyclists and transit riders as well in the streetscape that exists throughout our city. And so we also had a number of goals with the pilot program, and as we move to a permanent program where we're activating our streetscapes and creating spaces that make our streets and our public rights of way generally more accessible and more vibrant. Third, we want to create safe spaces to congregate. That is obviously something that is of paramount importance again during COVID. It's also of paramount importance as we move forward and think about what a permanent program looks like. We will have people sitting in the right of way dining. That's a wonderful thing, but we also need to make sure that patrons at these establishments, at these businesses and organizations in these parklet spaces are safe. And so that is also front and center.
And I think also when you talk about safe spaces to congregate, can we also talk about ADA accessibility? And I think that's the other important thing about this program and having oversight is to ensure we do have small sidewalks. They're not as open, but we still need to make sure that they're accessible to folks who are disabled. That's
absolutely true. That is, that's a non-negotiable in all of this. It's a challenge too in our streets. It is in a city like New Orleans, especially. as you noted, the sidewalks are not always at the level of maintenance that we need them to be in terms of grade and pitch. And so we actually see parklets as being a potential solution for assisting with complying with ADA and really achieving the goal of ADA around accessibility. One of the reasons why we set up the pilot the way we did was because we actually had to navigate with our ADA office, and I should thank Eva Hurst here for doing great work with us on this, and the Department of Justice at the federal level. But we need to make sure that moving forward, all of these spaces are ADA accessible and compliant. All of the, and we'll talk about this in a moment, but all of the parklets that are created under the permanent program will have to be built out at curb height and must be ADA compliant and accessible.
And that's super important. And so for the general public, that I'm sure there's thousands of people watching this. But what some people understand is what we, yes, it's all nice and well and good to put tables and chairs on the sidewalk and you have this lovely outdoor seating, but to walk next to it is one thing, but to have a streetcar excuse me, that's a previous slide, but to have a wheelchair, you don't have that same access point.
That's right.
Right. And so by actually putting them into the street, you're actually making it even more ADA accessible, especially if it's curb height. And then you still allow for people to maneuver on the sidewalks in a much better way.
That's exactly it.
Okay.
Yep. And then I guess lastly, and this is more of a general catch-all set of outcomes that we were looking to achieve, but really at the end of the day, this is about promoting thriving communities, right? This interrelationship between our neighborhood commercial corridors where so many of our small businesses exist in our city, how they relate to the surrounding communities, how, New Orleans, lives in the street better than really any other city in the country. How can we be really forward thinking about public right of way and how it supports the vibrancy of our communities? And so that was a fourth goal that we had. We can go to the next slide, please. So the pilot parklet was, I think a resounding success. I think, certainly want to keep it in perspective, and I'll share a couple numbers on that. But we've received, frankly, really overwhelmingly positive feedback from the pilot parklet.
I need to interrupt you.
Oh, please.
We just lost the feed in the chamber. We are still streaming on YouTube, but I need to step away from the computer. So you're going to be on this slide for a minute while I go into the chamber and work to resolve that streaming issue.
No problem. Thanks, Paul. The IT support. Thank you. So with the pilot, we initiated this in fall of 2020. The program, again, was designed to, first and foremost, address the immediate needs of our COVID response. Creating safe places for our communities to congregate. We knew and still know that being outdoors is much safer than being indoors. And as we're currently dealing with an Omicron surge, we know that this continues to be the case for our small business community throughout the city. The pilot initially began downtown. We sort of beta tested it in collaboration with the Downtown Development District, and then very quickly expanded the pilot citywide. It was constrained to restaurants and bars, and that will continue to be the case for the foreseeable. But we do envision these spaces eventually being available to a range of business types. The pilot was always intended on being a bridge to a permanent program. It, of course, and we'll talk about this in a few moments, but, it, of course, takes some time to establish a new permit, especially one that deals with the public right of way in the city. And so, as you've seen, we've actually extended the fee waivers and the pilot program itself a number of times through the pandemic, as the mayor has extended the emergency order. And as we've seen the pandemic, unfortunately, continue to ebb and flow. And so, this has been a program as a pilot that's meant to be flexible. It's meant to, help the city learn what is effective and what's not. What are some of the challenges that do arise? And we want to certainly address any of those. During the pilot, the city provided a number of traffic barriers, as you can see in the photo here for this draft parking guideline document that you can see on this slide. A number of businesses have modified those water-filled barriers and actually, made them more beautiful, added landscaping and some lighting and whatnot. That was always intended to be a part of the pilot. As we move to the permanent program, we are going to, the city will no longer be providing those free of charge to businesses. Businesses will be investing in these spaces as a part of the permanent program and creating platforms that are at curb height, that have the appropriate pitch, that are ADA compliant, that allow for drainage and provide for the safety that is of paramount importance.
So Jeffrey, to get back to the orange and white, I don't
Yes.
think anybody likes them. I mean, right, it looks like you're eating at a construction site.
Indeed.
So is there going to be a timeline that you're going to be removing them?
Yes, great question. So, right, we know that the aesthetics there are less than desirable. Those, we will not end the pilot program until the permanent program is in place, which will likely be later this spring. We'll talk a little bit more about timeline. The Department of Public Works and the city will be removing those barriers as every business that has a pilot permit right now will be forced to apply for a permanent program. But we're not going to create a gap in the timeline. So at the point that a business can apply for and receive a permanent parklet permit, that is the timeline on which we will be removing the barriers.
Can they request, if they have a plan in place that's more aesthetically pleasing, can they request them to be removed and put them in themselves?
So we likely will, because they're required as a part of the pilot program, we don't want to see the barriers get removed immediately. If the business has an alternative during the pilot that they would like to do, if there are, concrete planter boxes, for example, or, heavy metal barriers that can be used, we can certainly discuss with each of the businesses that's participating in the pilot program right now. But for right now, my expectation is that the city won't be removing those barriers that have been deployed until the permanent program is in place.
Because, other cities that I've seen that have done this have used like the concrete, and then you just pull it, and they look so much better. They really do. Concrete blocks, and you just put one on each end. Yep. And then the operators can do anything they want on the other sides.
Yep. No, absolutely. And I totally agree. And I think that will be a significant element of the permanent program, right? The water-filled barriers, just frankly were what we could immediately deploy, quite easily and provided that level of safety as we, undertook the pilot program. But completely agree that particularly in our historic areas, but really throughout the city, I think every community cares about, the aesthetics, especially in their commercial corridors. And so, that is going to be, the design consideration is going to be front and center as we, roll out the permanent program.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, I would strongly recommend, if it's at all possible, to allow people to, if they have a better movement, to be able to do that sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. And I won't single out any businesses in particular, but there are some restaurants we've seen in the warehouse district, for example, that actually got some custom fitted kind of skirts or aprons that go around the barriers, and they look wonderful. And so I think are some lower cost interventions that we can do in the meantime, recognizing that we haven't a couple of months yet till the permanent program's in place.
Right.
But I totally agree. Aesthetics are of considerable importance here. Yeah. We have enough real construction going on. We don't need more construction barriers than necessary.
Yeah. Weeds starting to grow out of them too.
Exactly. And I'm sure DPW would like some of their water-filled barriers back to deploy elsewhere. Just in terms of some data, we have some additional data and survey work that we did. We actually worked with Syracuse University to do some survey work to get some qualitative and quantitative metrics on this. Ultimately, we permitted around 40 businesses during the pilot, which is both a healthy number for us to get some real data points. They were concentrated, obviously, in sort of the downtown, in historic areas, as well as some areas of uptown. We expect, that number obviously to grow over time with the permanent program, but just in terms of perspective here, San Francisco had about 2,000 businesses participate during COVID, during their pilot. New York had 11,000 restaurants participate during this, the pandemic, and both of those cities and Philadelphia, many of our peer cities, are going through exactly the process we are right now, where they are developing their permanent programs as their pilots have all ended. But I think, we're dealing in some ways with an order of magnitude difference, and in terms of some of the issues around the density of restaurants and the like that we saw in other cities. We obviously want to see this number grow in New Orleans. We think this is a great way to, again, achieve all of the multiple benefits that we were talking about a moment ago. But we're dealing currently with about 40 businesses that participated in the pilot. And I should mention that's with, basically very, very little cost, apart from potentially acquiring some new outdoor tables and chairs. Everything else in terms of the barriers and the permit fee waivers was no cost to the business. So just want to keep that in perspective in terms of the kind of ramp up that we're envisioning when we transition to a permanent program. Just some other quick details on how the pilot played out. Businesses applied through the one-stop shop. They submitted their plans. They didn't have to be formal architect drawings. They had to be, more than on the back of a napkin, but, had to show, compliance with, a number of regulations and street frontage requirements. They couldn't block driveways or reduce sight lines or block fire hydrants, for example, and loading zones. Safety and permits in DPW did amazing yeoman's work. I'll just give a big shout out to that whole team, especially Kevin Gerard, for going out and actually working with every single one of these business owners, measuring the street grade and the sidewalk grade, and really working to help businesses participate in this important program. And we expect that relationship to continue with the permanent program. And then once that review is completed, it generally took our goal is around 2 to 3 weeks, and so we were able to deploy the permits very quickly after a business applied, even with everything else going on during COVID. I'm not sure if Paul is back, but
yeah, he's back. He's ready to go.
Okay, great. Okay, wonderful. So yeah, we can go on to the next slide. So that's the Parklet pilot. So now we're moving on to the implementation of the permanent program, which is, I think really why Councilmember Palmer, we wanted to discuss this today. There's really two pieces here that we want to emphasize, as well as a third that doesn't necessarily require council action, but is an integral part of rolling out the permanent program. So it's really these 3 steps. First, we would request, as the administration, that the council make a motion to ask the City Planning Commission to incorporate Parklets into the CZO. We would anticipate that being more or less a 60-day process to draft the report and consider the amendments to the CZO to allow for this at a public meeting. Simultaneous to that, they're sort of moving on parallel tracks. The council will also pass an ordinance that will adopt the sort of official regulations and framework that will create the permanent program, adding this to the roster of other permits that businesses and residents can apply for in the city. This will be very similar, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but very similar to a sidewalk cafe permit process. Due to the additional concerns around liability, there will likely be some enhanced requirements around parklets, but nothing too onerous. But that ordinance will kind of set up that general framework and the fee structure and the like for the permanent permit. And then on a third parallel track, internally with the city and obviously working very closely with council and stakeholders, It's actually DPW's formal domain to actually promulgate the rules and regulations that will kind of fill out the details of the program. We have a working draft of that. It's something that, a number of city departments have been collaborating on really over the last, 6 or 9 months, and even longer in the case of some of the pilot work that we've been doing, the pilot regs. And there will be a public meeting required as a part of that process of developing the regulations. We've been meeting with stakeholders, as I know your office is aware, Councilmember Palmer. And it's not to say that this program doesn't have some concerns among some different neighborhoods or stakeholders. We want to work to address any of those concerns as we develop the regulations. And so we'll be doing that. We're going to have weekly meetings, for the next couple of months to make sure that those rules and regs are promulgated in a timely manner. And the goal is that at the point that the CZO, or the City Planning Commission has, finalized its report to consider the amendment to the CZO, at the point that that is finished, we will have the rules and regulations more or less finalized. And so a little later this spring, we'll be able to have a program that businesses will actually be able to apply for a permanent parklet permit. So
Jeff,
that's,
I think a lot of the concerns and the issues when you talk about what the rules and regulations are whether or not the rules and regulations will be enforced.
indeed.
And I think that is really the pushback that we've been hearing from some folks is just that, right? Like, who is responsible for enforcing? And how often do you do that? And do you do it after hours? Because, again, we talk about the problem in the city is that we're a 24-hour city,
Right.
and then you don't have enforcement after 5 or 6 p.m. And that's where the quality of life issues often arise.
Yep.
So if you can talk a little bit about how y'all are going to envision the enforcement part of it. But to lead into that, you said you only had 40 that were licensed. So
Right.
I'm assuming we all know that there are a lot more than 40 out there.
Correct.
So the other ones that are out there are not licensed.
That's right.
And
Yes.
there's no enforcement on those.
That currently, we've been doing selective enforcement around them, but it's a great point. In the transition to the permanent program, because everyone, licensed, and those businesses that have taken some liberties and set up seating in the street without a permit, we are aware of those. Everyone will have to apply for a permanent permit. And so we will be doing significant enforcement at the outset to ensure compliance. Any parklet that currently exists in the city, licensed or unlicensed, is going to have to be essentially removed. For those that are legitimate and are those businesses that apply for a permanent permit, we want that to be a next day sort of no gap in operations as they transition from the pilot parklet to the permanent one. For those businesses that are not compliant, we absolutely will be closing those down. They're not allowed.
Why don't you start, because what I heard you say a little bit earlier was that, when we were talking about the construction barriers, that those aren't going to be removed until the permanent happens, and that's going to be in the spring.
Yep.
So you're saying you're not going to enforce the illegally operating ones until the spring as well?
No, we'll be doing enforcement prior to that, certainly. But at a minimum, all of the parklets that exist in the city currently will be removed, and only those that actually apply for and receive a permanent permit will be able to continue. But no, we'll be doing enforcement and removing the unlicensed parklets in the coming weeks.
And then
that will
the
not be
ones that
limited.
are unlicensed, will you give them the opportunity, if they come into compliance, to become licensed?
Absolutely. Assuming that they can meet, the guidelines, we'll be working with DPW and safety and permits. The only times that that permits are ever denied is when we can't meet even the temporary ADA requirements for the pilot program. Those are pretty rare in the case of the pilot parklets. And so we absolutely will work with any business who wants to get compliant. But we also know that there are some folks who are flouting the regs, and we'll certainly be enforcing those.
So if there has been, let's look at quality of life complaints. If there has been significant complaints against either an illegally operating parklet or an operating parklet, a legally operating one.
Right.
Is that going to reflect on their ability to get a permanent permit?
It's a great question. I think we'll deal with it on a case-by-case basis. In the instance of businesses that have been that the city's interacted with, and again, won't name any names, but we know that there have been some bad actors or some businesses that have kind of flouted the city doing multiple enforcement activities. That certainly will weigh in on, there is a certain amount of discretion on the part of DPW and others to allow a business to use what is a public right of way. So if they've been bad actors and not been compliant in the past, that absolutely will be a consideration in the regulations. We obviously want to have criteria and a process for that. We won't, leave that up to, complete subjective judgment. But that certainly weighs in if a business has not been a good actor prior to now. If they simply didn't know or, were, denied and still want one, the permanent program is a way to address some of the grade issues and other challenges that have prevented some businesses who would like to be legitimate from having one during the pilot. And the permanent program will allow for the construction of a deck that will mitigate any grade and drainage and other issues that have existed currently.
Okay. And with all that being said, I mean, I do think we should try, our first step should be trying to get people into compliance.
Absolutely.
Understanding what the rules are. I mean, I can't tell you the number of business owners that have come to me and told me that, because of this program, they were able to stay open during COVID, and they were able not to let people go, and they were able to still provide jobs. And I also get, I also have people consistently tell me how much they love it,
Same here.
And I love frequenting all of, as many as
Indeed.
they can.
Exactly. Outdoors. Yes. And Councilmember Palmer, I should also mention, we couldn't agree more on the enforcement front. As you are very, very well aware, another real collaboration between the administration and council is with the Office of Nightlife and that work that we will be ramping up, thanks to yours and the mayor's and others' leadership. That office will have after hours enforcement as an element of it. And so, not only leaning on an already overburdened, safety and permits and code enforcement office, but also really thinking about enforcement, in after hours. It's something that's front of mind for us. And so that new office will be able to, I think, supplement and really, help make sure that when any, abuses or violations are happening, we're actually able to respond to them more in real time. So I think that will also be an element of enforcement that will, continue to develop over the coming months.
Okay.
Yep.
Great.
All right. Great. Those are great questions. And that's certainly the feedback that we've heard as well. If there is, sort of one negative to any of this, it is around enforcement. So Paul, we can go to the next slide, if you don't mind.
I think he had to go
Yeah,
fix the connection again.
got it. Okay.
The next slide is just about next steps. I'm looking at it right now.
That's great. Yes. And, really it's sort of just outlining what I just said. There will be these three simultaneous activities happening. First is, thank you. Thanks. Is just around, the CPC motion. The second is around the ordinance for council to pass and take action on. And then third is on the executive side here with the city departments, just promulgating those rules and regulations.
Right.
So with that, I will stop there. Thank you so much. Thank you for your leadership on that, Councilmember Palmer.
I appreciate it. I'm excited. Actually, I'm very excited to be leaving with this coming to permanency and
it's poetic.
Other things. It's been nice having this committee hearing to see all the things that are continuing on. So that's always the goal, right? That who's ever in office, you still have things that are working for the people. With that being said, I know that we have a lot of public comment. Zach, how many do we have? Okay, we have about 9 public comment.
All right.
The substantial amount of comments that my office has received have been about parklets in the French Quarter in residential areas. And as you know, there's always that pressure. The French Quarter has always been a neighborhood, but there has been an over commercialization and pressure there. And so I know that is something that gives my office a lot of concern. But let's hear some of these comments. Let's see, is she going to?
I don't know, it's frozen or something, but I am actually here. Can you hear me?
I see you.
Okay. So we have, yes, 9 comments on the parklets. And the first comment is from Aaron Holmes, the executive director of the View Car. If I'm saying that correctly. Property owners, residents association.
Soon it will roll off your tongue in no time. It's the Bucharest Property Owners and Residents Association. Trust me. Takes us
Okay.
all. And tout ensemble will also start rolling off your tongue in a matter of months. So don't worry.
I'm working on it. VPORA has supported the creation of temporary parklets in the French Quarter to assist struggling local businesses during the pandemic. However, any consideration of a permanent program needs to consider the realities of life, limitations of space in this new unique neighborhood. Parklets have been applauded in other cities as ways to increase foot traffic and drive interest to specific areas. Yet the French Quarter is already the most visited neighborhood in the city with ample commercial offerings. We ask that the committee strongly consider the impacts of increased outdoor noise, sanitation, and crowds on adjacent neighborhoods, particularly in residential areas where businesses have been grandfathered in. Note there are currently 5 parklets in residential zones here, 4 of which are permitted. Further, only 1 other parklet outside of the French Quarter is in a residential zone. Additionally, safety concerns for patrons, pedestrians, and overall ADA accessibility are a significant concern for our narrow and often impassable streets and sidewalks. Finally, and importantly, the existing parklets bear little resemblance to anything that can contribute to the historic tout ensemble.
That's right. Tout ensemble. Don't worry, you'll get it. Tout ensemble.
Matter here, they drive our economy. These parklets, even if their designs were improved, will mask and obscure our world famous and carefully preserved architecture. All of these concerns are amplified by the city's reduced capacity and perceived ambivalence toward enforcement. Design guidelines and limitations on size and operational hours will not mitigate anything without a proven commitment to enforce the rules. Parklets can be a wonderful addition for other parts of the city, but please consider exempting the French Quarter, especially the residentially zoned areas, from this program. Thank you for your careful consideration as you move forward. Next, we have April Donaldson. The parklets have been a wonderful boon for restaurants and bars in the city. Not only does it add to the income of the businesses, it creates a wonderful streetscape and makes our city feel more alive and vibrant, allowing only space for cars, does not allow space for people. Please keep and expand the parklet program. Stephen Cassini, I appreciate the economic drivers for instituting a parklet program during the pandemic. That said, conditions have changed. Patrons are more than willing to dine indoors, and I personally would like to see the program discontinued. If it is to go forward on either an extension of the temporary basis or a more permanent basis, in addition to the many conditions Councilmember Palmer is reportedly going to place before the committee council, I would like to stress the need for more standardization of the construction, material, size, use of color, etc., and appearance of these areas. The parklets that I have seen are a disgrace. I have seen used materials to establish boundaries. The use of orange barriers is completely inappropriate. Trash is allowed to contaminate the streets. Any approval to further this program should come with design and construction and operational requirements that are consistent and complement the neighborhoods, particularly the French Quarter. Thank you. Mark Masor. I oppose permanent parklets in the French Quarter as they present significant safety, access, noise, and other quality of life concerns. Andy Gallagher. I am strongly opposed to parklets in the French Quarter for many reasons. Number one, parklets diminish the historic character of the neighborhood. Visitors who have previously been able to transcend time exploring our historic treasure will now be distracted by the annoying facade of modern parklet structures, blocking the creation of artistic photos or just the aesthetic enjoyment of our unique buildings. Number two, safety. French Quarter streets are narrow and we may have many drunk drivers. Putting tables in the middle of the street will inevitably lead to tragedy. In a perfect world, people will comply with all vehicular laws, but we know this not to be the case in the French Quarter. Number three, city priorities. A few years ago, the city invested in tools to block vehicular traffic from crossing Bourbon, for fear someone would drive into a crowd, but now we are putting tables on the street. Also, the city is engaged in a designated bike lane program, but French Quarter Parklets block bike lanes. The city invests in ADA compliance by adding ramps to curbs, but the parkland street tables ultimately limit accessibility. I'm so confused. What are we doing? Number 4, enforcement or lack of. I know the city has a utopic vision of what these parklets could be, but in reality, the city is incapable of enforcing any regulation when it comes to nighttime activities in the French Quarter. Number 5, overall lack of specific details. How many parklets will be allowed on a block? Where does the business put trash? Who will enforce usage hours? What is the city's plan to compensate for the limited street parking? And that was last comment there. I have seen areas of the city where parklets work. The one outside Lola's on Esplanades looks wonderful as they have made ample room in a wide street. It simply does not work in the French Quarter. They have Sue Klein. I would like the parklets program to be eliminated for the French Quarter, or at least in non-entertainment zones. There is a bar on the corner of Toulouse and North Rampart that routinely eliminates my ability to sleep because of the loud music and noisy patrons. Last weekend, the exterior music and noise did not stop until 5 a.m. I noticed law enforcement twice with no results. Also, these parklets take up precious parking spaces, and the majority in my area look like gargantuan, overstuffed Legos that do not fit the top ensemble of the French Quarter. Please do not allow these to continue. A few individuals are financially benefiting on the backs of quality of life and health for residents and quality of experience for most visitors. There appears to be no rules of operation and or enforcement, if any exist. Now, Robert Kenny, parklets in the French Quarter are not historic, are ugly and dangerous. In residential zones, parklets are an expansion of non-conforming businesses in residential areas, which is illegal, will cause noise and litter problems. I am opposed. Brad Ott, thank you for the New Orleans Parklets program. I am encouraged with this kind of business and quality of life development, especially as it benefits small businesses. I'm looking forward to this kind of enhancement becoming a permanent feature of New Orleans business and cultural life with passage of this ordinance. I want to further thank and recognize the work of members of the City Council Transportation Committee, especially Council Member Kristen Palmer, whose leadership in this regard has exemplary in making our public streets safer for all road users, especially for pedestrians and bicyclists. And finally, we have Charles Bracht. The parklets in the French Quarter were established in response to a pandemic. When the pandemic eases, they should be totally eliminated. Restaurants and bars do not need to use public space. Until 2020, they were doing just fine. The parklets are dangerous, take up street space and parking, or block the sidewalk. They are very unattractive and create noise since patrons are not inside the establishment. Further, especially in the French Quarter, they are non-historic and very ugly. I strongly oppose any ordinance that establishes parklets permanently in the French Quarter. That concludes the comments.
Thank you so much. So I think we pretty much knew where those comments were going, Jeff, and you know, I know we're working in my office on an amendment in terms of some of the residential parts of the French Quarter. I do not agree that they're non-historic. Anybody can go to Paris or any other European city that's older than New Orleans. And when we did not have central air, people ate outside and sat outside. So we can throw that one off as a complaint. But what we can say is that the design guidelines do absolutely need to be improved.
Right.
And we have to recognize that some spaces and areas aren't all created equal. Like our neighborhoods are very different. And the biggest concern I have been hearing has been the enforcement piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the city does have an abysmal track record when it comes to enforcement on many levels. And I think there's a genuine concern for residents, and we do have to put their concerns first within the French Quarter. I do feel also, though, very strongly, and for the other people, I put this program in before there was COVID. So I was trying to push this in the city before there was COVID, and people didn't understand. It does make neighborhoods safer. And, you know, a lot of our while promoting small business And, a lot of our small businesses in New Orleans, especially in our urban core neighborhoods, the restaurants are very small and they don't have the proper seating areas. And there have been tremendous amount of studies done across the country that this can promote more people on a street, promote safer streets. And when we talk about the safety, and right now we're all dealing with that, with these increased crime rates post-COVID, that we really have to understand that and try to do as many smart things as we can through our streetscape and through the built environment to promote safe and livable communities, but also by paying attention to our quality of life. And so that also leads me to another question, a follow-up, is you stated that there are going to be weekly meetings in terms of what the permanent program is going to look like, and how are you going to engage the public in the neighborhoods in order to ensure that you have a multitude of voices?
That's great. Yes. We have internal weekly meetings just amongst the city departments that are going to be promulgating the rules and regulations. We'll be doing at least one sort of formal public meeting over the coming months around this. But, I think we collectively on behalf of the administration, I think happy to engage with different stakeholder groups and continue.
I would recommend that y'all do that, please,
Yeah.
to meet with different neighborhood groups. Especially in our urban core neighborhoods where there might be pressure, to see what they recommend. And also I would recommend, a conversation with landscape architects and other architects when we talk about what this looks like.
Yes.
We were able to do, pretty quickly by getting volunteer architects to draw things out. And there's so many design books on this that can be done really well and beautifully. And we really have to look at it as an option as well. I'm sorry, Councilman Glapion, did you have any questions? I'm sorry I didn't put this out to the floor before we went into public comment.
You're pretty comprehensive, ma'am. I do not have any questions. I was just listening to the public comment on both sides, but I'm straight. I don't have any additional questions. Thanks.
Councilmember Nguyen, I'm sorry, I also didn't put it out to you. Do you have any comments? She might be on mute. All right. Well, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate you. And we look forward to voting on this tomorrow.
Thank you so much. Likewise, council member. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. And our final agenda item is another thing near and dear to my heart, is the New Orleans Pedicab program. I don't know, Jeff, if you want to stick around for this one.
Also near and dear.
Yeah. Paul, I think we have a slideshow on this one as well, a PowerPoint.
That's right. Anita Curran should be pulling it up. I'm in the chamber babysitting our system.
Great.
There we go.
Thank you. Can we pull it up so it's the full screen, please? If it's possible, Miss Anita. Thank you. So just to give folks a little clarity on this, this was a program that my office initiated back in 2010. New Orleans did not have pedicabs before then. I guess some of you may curse me, some of you may love me, but it was something that was set up many years ago. So let's just go to the next slide, Miss Anita. So these have been growing popularity nationwide. As we know, we have seen them now. They're increasingly popular in areas across the city, such as Austin, Nashville, Savannah. Planning and urban transportation studies have confirmed the numerous advantages of non-motorized transportation like pedicabs, especially when we talk about on the environment. The benefits include economic opportunities for small businesses, jobs for operators who enjoy both exercise, outdoors, and obviously interaction with their public, and an alternative and environmentally friendly mode of transportation for both residents and tourists. Next slide, please. So the history of the program, like I referenced, this was calendar number 28,151, was my ordinance to repeal ordinance calendar 24111 and to amend and reordain chapter 162 of the code of the city under vehicles for hire. That's part of the code that deals with the vehicles for hire. And we added something called pedicab service to the provisions contained therein, which would provide regulations and establish rates. This is similar, folks, to what the council does, what the city does for cabs, for taxi cabs. So the ordinance was passed in October of 2010 after extensive amount of research, including and with all stakeholders, as well as with other cities, what works, what doesn't work, what type of vehicles are safe, which are not. And in order to do this well, we did it as a pilot program, and there was a cap of 45 licenses. To enhance the competition, it prohibits an individual from having an ownership interest in more than one pedicab company. And B, an owner or company from operating more than 15 pedicabs and from holding more than half the total of pedicab certificates of public necessity and convenience, also known as a CPNC. And that's also the designation, it's like the license that's given similarly to cab drivers. It limits the fare to no more than $5 per passenger for the first 6 blocks, and an additional fare up to $1 per passenger per additional block. There are no geographic boundaries. It was meant to be a citywide program so that the marketplace could determine where the needs are for the pilot program. It also would allow for additional licenses during special events. As we all know, the city expands and contracts on a regular basis. So it allowed for additional special event permits for Mardi Gras, Jazz Fest, et cetera. It also, folks, the other reasons why we did not make it geographically based is that, I think we all know it also provides for Saints games and anything that happens along Poydras into the Dome, another way of providing revenue and good transportation options. Next, please. So a lot of this conversation has also, though, what has happened is it's really become much more French Quarter based. There are a lot of existing transportation options in the French Quarter. They're also pricey. If you want to look at like the horse and carriages, those are also regulated by the city and by that same part of the code. There are tour groups within the French Quarter that adds additional pressure. There's ride share and there's bike share. Under enforcement issues, there has been an incredible amount of enforcement issues or lack thereof. We talked about this with the Parklet program, but we're seeing that there have been enforcement issues around transportation options within the French Quarter. There is still illegally operating party buses. Let's be also clear, this council created a whole new way, along with the administration, of guidelines for public safety in terms of party bus operators. My understanding is there's not one license as of yet. I could be wrong, please double check me. But all these party buses that we see around the city do not have licenses to operate. Golf carts, there are illegally operating golf carts that are charging for their services in and around the French Quarter. Pedal pubs, this council under my leadership also made them illegal because of the lack of enforcement, but my understanding is that there's still some operating. And then we also have unlicensed pedicabs. All of these entities are winding up taking money away from businesses that have been licensed. And that are legitimate businesses that also pay taxes to the city. So that's a whole nother issue when we don't have oversight. And needless to say, the use of our public streets deserves a higher level of scrutiny. This is why you have something called a CPNC, the Certificate of Public Necessity and Convenience, because the use of public streets are for the public, but they can also cause public safety issues, which is why these types of things need to be regulated. In addition to enforcement issues, there is, to give benefit of the doubt to everybody involved here, the city has seen a tremendous amount of flux in staffing because of COVID and after COVID. So we have to also appreciate that the environment in which the city is operating and the city employees are operating is much different than when this program went into effect. Also, another difference between now and then is that there are additional new transportation options that did not exist in 2010. Yes, folks, back then, we did not have rideshare. There was no Uber, there was no Lyft. There was also no bike share program, another program that I championed early on in my term. So these are also additional pressures that we have seen come into the French Quarter. Next slide, please. So this is what's talking. And so I also want to give an overview on New Orleans economic recovery. This is also what is different now versus what happened when we first put this pilot program together. According to a recent hospitality study, New Orleans hotel revenue per available room, which is the RevPAR, that's the standard measure of hospitality industry performance, encompassing both money and bookings, is expected to have a 16% compound annual growth rate from 2020 to 2025. So we're still not where we were before COVID. At this rate, RevPAR would recover to 2019 levels in 2023. The same study expects occupancy to recover to 2019 levels in 2024. So recovery may be negative. In addition to all of this, there's still some unknowns. Hence, who would have thought 3 weeks ago we would be back to these Zoom meetings? But recovery may be additionally negatively impacted by additional national disasters and new COVID variants. Other confounding factors for New Orleans are the national attention on early outbreaks here, as well as continued low vaccination rates in the state of Louisiana outside of Orleans Parish. Again, I want to give credit where credit is due. This city has been a leader in terms of getting people vaccinated, and it is unfortunate that the rest of the state has not kept up to the same levels as New Orleans. And we're also a blue island in a red region, and we're surrounded by other Yahoo states that are not vaccinating to the degree that they should. All right, next slide, please. So I just wanted to kind of give you all the overall why we're looking at this ordinance now. And it came to our attention several months ago that we were still operating, quite frankly, in the pilot period. I had assumed, and many of us had assumed, that it had gone into permanency, but it had not. So this ordinance ends the pilot period, and it establishes the cap of licenses at 45, as supported by industry, neighborhood associations, and business groups. In addition to that, I didn't sit and meet with a lot of the different groups, a lot of the operators and people that would like their own licenses. And look, I think it's great. We all want to have small businesses, but it's also an emotive response. And I just believe, and I also heard from the owners that said that there shouldn't be an extension. But I kind of believe, and I do believe, that a market analysis and a study needs to be initiated after 2 years to really determine what it should look like, and if there's going to be an increase, how many there should be. And that should be from a study and not from different sides having emotive responses to what should be and what shouldn't be. Next slide, please. So I've put together some amendments for this ordinance that makes it the program permanent. One of the amendments is focused around a market study to be conducted by a third party, which will consider the economy actually of scale, the enforcement, and the neighborhood impacts of changing the number of available license, as well as engaging stakeholder groups. Again, I think this could be an important opportunity to engage the operators of pedicabs, as well as the owners, as well as neighborhood groups that are being affected, and businesses. Stakeholder groups to be consulted include neighborhood associations, like I said, business and economic development interests, pedicab industry, and pedicab operators. The study may be done after 2 years. Again, and the reason for that being is the information that we presented on a previous slide about the economic recovery post-COVID. In addition to that, you'll need the chair of the Transportation Committee and the Ground Transportation Bureau. So you would have to have a representative from both the City Council, who does the legislation, as well as from the administration side that does the enforcement, to determine if the city hospitality industry has economically recovered from COVID-19. Please continue. And that is it. So I'd like to, can we go back to the regular screen? So with that, council members, does anybody have any questions or comments about what we're trying to do through this ordinance that we would like to present tomorrow to vote on, and how next steps would go?
So right now, Christian, we have 45 license.
Correct.
Basically, with this ordinance, it would cut off any new license. What if there was some pending that is being evaluated or being reviewed? And what happened?
So basically, because it's been a pilot program, you're not allowed to have any more than 45. You
Okay.
never have been allowed to have any more than 45. So it continues with that. But what it does do is it allows for a market analysis so that when we have a market analysis, can look to see whether or not the market can bear to have additional licenses, right? And that it's done from a third party so that we can look at both the impacts of the neighborhoods, that they can engage the stakeholders. And that means not just the operators, as well as the pedicab industry, as well as business groups and neighborhood groups. I also think, everybody knows that the hospitality industry has been hit incredibly hard with COVID. To start expanding in any type of hospitality field in a time where we don't have the same level of business doesn't, to me, make a lot of economic sense. And I would like to wait and obviously let time look at this and let this be based in science as opposed to an emotive response.
So where does the 70 comes from then? I know I'm reading a concern from Jordan Michael about the amendments. So where was the 70?
So initially what happened, Councilmember Nguyen, is that there was a in-house study done many years ago while we were doing the pilot program, and even before the pilot program. And it was made by an in-house recommendation from the head of the Ground Transportation Bureau by the name of Malachi Hull. And he worked with us when we did this. However, we felt that within a pilot program, we wanted to actually give ourselves time and give the industry time to look at this, which is why we capped it at 45.
Okay.
Again,
so that was the number 70 was a recommendation.
Correct. It was a recommendation. Correct. So it wasn't part of the initial program.
Was there also a commitment to make sure that there's DBEs provider as part of this, or?
So the way it was set up was that it was the administration at the time, which was the land administration, to determine that it would be an open process with a lottery system. And that was how they determined the different ways of getting these licenses. What we had done in anticipation of that which is one of the reasons why we put in there that you could not have multiple stakes and multiple businesses to allow to have different types of, we wanted to have more diversity within the program. Now, I also think within the market analysis, it would be a really great opportunity to also talk about how to incentivize that if any additional licenses are given, to make sure that it is incentivized towards minority and women-owned businesses. And I think that's the other benefit of having a market analysis, is so that when we do decide, if the city does decide to give out more licenses, how do we incentivize to make sure, right, that they go to minority-owned and women-owned businesses? Because I really feel that this is another opportunity to create more wealth.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Councilman Brosset, you were former chair of Transportation Committee. Did you want to weigh in on anything?
I had some concerns, just as Councilmember Nguyen just brought up. I know we've been getting flooded with some emails relative to the access and opportunity, and just wanted to hear from of both the administration. I know you just gave your comments regarding the current cap. I supported pedicabs. You were chair of transportation while I was in the legislature, and I wrote a letter in support that I provided to you while you was chair, to bring pedicabs into New Orleans because it was much needed. Places like Boston I visited, we much needed it, that amenity here in New Orleans. And I wanted to hear from the administration, how do they see this change affecting the access to opportunity?
I also put in at the end of, and we can ask them to speak to this tomorrow, because I have asked them to be here today as well. But in the ordinance that we're presenting tomorrow, on the last page, line 29, it states the director of the ground transportation shall use best efforts to ensure that at least 35% of the approved surplus pedicab CPNCs are allocated to registered disadvantaged business enterprises, consistent with chapter 70. So within this, we also have that should be a requirement. I also feel, again, that we should, as a council, direct any analysis, like I said, the third party look to see what this market could bear, to see how we can also incentivize to even surpass those numbers, quite frankly. But I think to do anything now in a market that has been depressed and that it doesn't make a lot of economic sense, because we could also wind up hurting the operators, and I'm talking about the drivers, right? If we also put out more, and then how do we know what is the actual number? It could be more, it could be less, we could miss an opportunity. And I think I'd rather not kill an industry and the people that are working there during this period of unknown.
So you're saying that the administration is going to speak more to it tomorrow?
We hope.
All right, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Okay, we're gonna have, I'd like to go to some public comment here. We have a significant amount, I think, on both sides. What do we have right now?
We had well over 100 and a mix of comments on both sides. I'm gonna
Do
try
you have
to.
a feel of, do you have a breakdown? Do you have a breakdown, Cherie, on?
I don't have an exact breakdown. It's about half and half. I can finalize it after the meeting.
Okay.
Because many comments continue to come in.
Right.
So I can sort them again. I will say I did go through and try to sort through some pros and cons. And I'm going to start with one that just picks up on what you were talking about.
Why don't we do this, Cherie? In order for it to be fair, I'd like to give, let's give 15 minutes to each side.
Okay.
And then that way we can have a good understanding of both, or we can rotate between a positive. It might be easier just for you to read all of it.
I can skip. I mean, I can try to skip through to the support first and pose.
Yeah, let's do that. And then
a mix. So that's why.
Yeah, so let's do 15 minutes for opposition, 15 minutes for in support.
Okay, start with opposition. Okay.
Right.
All right, so let me go back. Okay, so I will start then with Marshall Spencer. I'm a former CPNC holder. As a longtime resident of New Orleans, looking at the clock, I find it important to comment on this topic. I've seen firsthand the positive effect the pedicab industry has brought to the city. As a rider, I was unable to provide a clean and efficient service to tourism. I was able to provide a clean and efficient service to tourists and locals alike. Not once did any of my customers have a bad experience. Most of the time they would leave excited about the unique way in which they were able to move through or explore our city. These sort of positive experiences have proven pedicabs to be an asset for the city of New Orleans. With that in mind, I think it's important to continue to regulate the industry as we have since the inception of the pilot program. The companies that truly hold the licenses have proven that they can provide the sort of safe and reliable service we need in the city. They have been able to self-regulate and keep up the positive image. I believe allowing more operators into the market would have a negative effect on the industry. There would be less ability from the city and the operators to regulate the pedicabs on the street. And with more pedicabs on the street, there will be more competition amongst the riders. This sort of competition on an already tight market can cause people to start to cut corners in order to gain an advantage. With that will come less positive and less safe experiences for the people paying for the service. You can already see multiple pedicabbers sitting in the same spots at any given time. If they were busy enough to sustain consistent rides throughout their whole shift, they would not need to line up and wait in the same spots. It's clear that adding more to the streets is not necessary at this time. Thanks for taking the time to read my comments. Renee Franson, we have no need for more pedicabs in the French Quarter at this time. As a resident of the French Quarter since 1978, I have seen the increase of vehicles of all types that impede the normal flow of traffic and lessen my quality of life. Stuart Ayers, as an avid user of the pedicabs in NOLA, I would like to comment on how beneficial I believe they are to the city. Every ride I take or witness is highly professional and advantageous for the user. This is not the case in every city. Other cities have flooded the streets with pedicabs and they have become less desirable and usable. I think we have the perfect amount and do not believe we need more that'll detract from the value. Thank you for your time and considering my response. Stephen Treadaway, pedicabs are a great thing for the city, but a cap should exist. Adding more would be detrimental in my opinion. Love my city. Pierre Touzet, as a property owner in the French Quarter, I like the way the pedicabs have operated and do not think we need more on the streets. I do not see a need for more pedicabs. Let's see. Glade Billy, second, French Quarter citizen. At a meeting of the Office of French Quarter Citizens in April of this year, you expressed your frustration with the prevalence of pedicabs in the French Quarter. You were particularly upset by the proliferation of renegade pedicabs that were plying the streets of the French Quarter with no license and no affiliation with the legitimately permitted vehicles. Our board also agrees that the horse carriages, the segways, and the newfound need to have bike paths throughout the densely packed streets of the quarter, that the number of pedicabs should be limited. That is why it is of particular concern to us at French Quarter citizens that there is even an effort to increase the number of pedicabs permitted in the quarter. While there may be additional licenses available, it is not appropriate to allow these licenses to be granted at this time. The poor maintenance of the streets, numerous buses and delivery vehicles, the congestion of existing pedicabs, the continued construction of cell towers, the unnecessary extension of the parklets in the quarter, and the addition of the blue bike fleet all make for a very unsafe environment for additional pedicabs. That is why the Board of French Quarter Citizens is against the granting of additional pedicab permits at this time. Okay. Nikki Salowinski, we already have more than enough pedicabs trolling the French Quarter for fares at all hours of the day. The last thing we need is more. We have tried using them a few times and every time they massively overcharge. The last time we used one, we had to barter the price down. The guy took off before we could get his license info. Until officials can get the traffic under control and enforce all the laws on pedicabs, ride shares, cabs, blue bikes, and the spending, there should be no more expansion of licenses. In the end, though, there really is not that much demand for pedicabs. Most pass our house empty with the driver chatting on his phone. Okay, Matthew Lefkowitz, I want to express my appreciation of the pedicab community and my desire to maintain pedicabs as a transportation option in the city. Pedicabs have been a positive addition to the French Quarter and downtown. They are easy, unique, and fun transportation option. I strongly feel that no additional pedicabs are currently needed. I do not believe that adding up to 20 more pedicabs to the already available 45 pedicabs is necessary. The current companies meet the demands of residents and visitors, and they have proven responsive to issues. They have been good stewards of our community. Excuse me. Brittany Mulla McGovern, the French Quarter Business Association. The French Quarter Business Association Board of Directors recommends that the City Council end the pedicab trial period and permanently cap the amount of pedicabs allowed on the street to 45. The French Quarter has ample vehicular conveyances to accommodate the residents, workers, and visitors, including but not limited to streetcars, blue bikes, independent bike rental, mule carriages, taxis, and rideshare. Additional conveyances in the historic core would create traffic and congestion. There was a temporary cap set to assess the viability of the business. The current number of pedicab licenses has been effective and the demand does not warrant more. Okay, Kyle Dupre. In light of the Transportation Committee's ongoing conversations regarding the pedicab program, I'm writing to express both my appreciation and concern as a resident of the French Quarter. Undoubtedly, the pedicabs have been a welcome and valuable addition to the quarter. They provide fun, easy, and unique transportation option, which also happens to blend well with the overall atmosphere of this historic neighborhood. Furthermore, as a frequent user, I've noticed that the companies currently operating pedicabs have proven to be responsive and thoughtful stewards. However, I must voice my concern regarding possible additions to the program and would advise that no additional pedicabs are currently warranted. Such an increase would likely upset the delicate balance of convenience and congestion within the neighborhood to the already significant traffic that affects the area. Again, it is worth stressing that the unique atmosphere the French Quarter enjoys, brimming with life yet delightfully easygoing, could be threatened by such expansions. I believe that the pedicab companies already in operation more than meet the demand of both residents and visitors, and an increase in their number would create an unwelcome strain. Pierre Tuzet, in favor of keeping the number of pedicabs to 45. Happy with current business operating. Any more may become a nuisance. Sijuan Villieri, I am in support of capping the current pedicab licenses to 45 in New Orleans. It is too difficult for the city to enforce the legal and illegal modes of transportation that have taken over, which start to feel unsafe. The downtown area is already incredibly congested during large events, especially with the increase in party buses, golf carts, pedal taverns, and other illegal transportation. Allowing more pedicabs would add to this already out of control issue. Please, no more additional pedicabs. Okay, let's see. Okay, Madeline Price. To whom it may concern, I do not usually write to the city about issues in general, but I heard about this agenda item and feel compelled to let you know how I feel. I am 100% support of capping the current pedicab licenses to 45 in New Orleans. I have lived in both Austin and San Francisco and can attest to the fact that New Orleans did it the right way when adopting the pedicabs over 10 years ago. We do not want to become overrun by pedicabs. My family and I take them frequently, and some of the riders even know us by name. They are courteous and are good ambassadors for the city. We have just the right amount and do not need to expand at this time. I hope that you take my comments seriously. All right. And Annalise Blank. As a Metairie resident, I often use rideshare services to get to and from CBD French Quarter area. Pedicabs offer an affordable and practical way to navigate the area after using rideshare services to get to the area of the city. There are already ample pedicab services established, and we just need to find employees to fill the driver positions. There is no need to populate the street and slow traffic with additional pedicab businesses. All service industry businesses are experiencing a shortage of workers, just as restaurateurs will be ill-advised to open a new enterprise due to lack of available employees. There is no need to saturate the already congested quarter with additional pedicabs with no drivers to drive them. Jeremy Turner, Need a Ride LLC. Hello, my name is Jeremy Dean Turner. I was a rider slash shift manager for Need a Ride LLC from August 2012 to June 2017, and then was a rider and general manager from June 2017 up to the COVID lockdown of 2020. Throughout the years that I was a pedicab driver, it was always my opinion that 45 cabs among the three companies was more than adequate to service our main area of the French Quarter / CBD. This became even more apparent when Uber and Lyft became more prevalent in these areas. Adding more pedicabs to the situation will not help anyone presently or in the future. Adding any more pedicabs to the mix will only make the French Quarter / CBD even more crowded with drivers, which I don't see how that could be a good thing at all. In my opinion, less is more in this situation, not the other way around. If COVID-19 had not happened, I would still be at Need a Ride, but had to find a different job. I have been a real estate photographer since August of 2020. I cannot speak more highly of Evan Alford as an owner, always being very fair with the riders. I am sure all three companies have barely scraped by as small businesses due to COVID-19. Now that things have started to maybe get back to normal, I'm willing to bet it's nowhere close to what it was before the pandemic. Adding more pedicabs would only further strain the success of the present companies and riders. Charles Shilley, the ordinance does more than hurt our local entrepreneur potential. It gives a massive appearance of impropriety, sheltering several wealthy men from competition in a career I once had. In fact, the owner I worked for was a nice man. That's it. I don't know about this. It's corporate welfareism in its finest. That one's kind of not full apologies. Adam Cohen, the proposed pedicabs resolution in New Orleans is cronyism at its worst. So some of them are starting to maybe transition. There's some where they just want to vote down the ordinance. If you want me to keep reading those. It serves no legitimate public interest whatsoever, and if passed would doom legitimate business competitors who could provide a vital service equal to or better than current operators. There is no downside to voting no. I'll read another no, and I think that'll be the 15 minutes you'd asked for. Jonathan Boyd. Ladies and gentlemen of the council, in 2012, the same year pedicabs first graced the streets of New Orleans, the council voted to end a near identical economic model for taxi cabs because they believed it to be an unjust system that was harmful to the spirit of free enterprise and entrepreneurship of the citizens of New Orleans, especially those citizens often least represented in positions of business ownership. It was a curious decision by the council then, and it is even more curious decision nearly 10 years later that the council would seek to cement an economic model they found to hinder the opportunity of many for the prosperity of a few. I believe the ordinance specifically to the way CPNCs are capped at 45 distributed among three companies is unnecessarily restrictive and harmful to the spirit of entrepreneurship, especially the people of color and women. If the council votes yes today, you'll be slamming the door shut forever on the ability of disadvantaged groups from being able to start their own business in the industry. I believe that not only should the council vote no today, but the ordinance should be rewritten so that individuals may hold CPNCs. I understand that one of the greatest fears of the council is that individual ownership will cause an oversaturation of the market, leading to two negative consequences. One, the already crowded and congested streets of the French Quarter will become more crowded and congested. I would like to say the current overcrowding caused by pedicabs in the pre-COVID era is due to the current ownership model. Without getting bogged down into too much industry minutia, allow me to explain. When there is a large event such as Mardi Gras, the demand for pedicabs outstrips supply easily. And on Wednesday in August, there are way more pedicabs on the street than needed. The Wednesday in August when the quarter is full of empty pedicabs sitting on every corner waiting on rides is the issue. It's an issue for riders as well. No one wants to sit in the steaming heat of the summer making no money. But under the current ownership model, if you want to be able to make money during Mardi Gras, you have to suffer in August. If the council was serious about alleviating congestion, they would put a cap on the amount of CPNs one company could hold. 2, an oversaturation of the market would mean that no one is making money. I refer you back to my example of Mardi Gras versus August. The market will dictate where there is money, and when there is money during large events, there is enough for everyone to eat. In 2013, Malachi Hull issued a report to the council that the city could sustain an increase of at least 20 more cabs. While I think the city could support 20 more cabs owned and operated by a cooperative model would not only be more economic and more economically fair model, it would also provide a route to ownership for a more diverse group. Voting no on today's proposal and allowing more ownership would show the city and the council's dedication to all of its citizens and not just their donors. Okay, with that transition, I think that was 15 minutes continuing to read some of the support. Okay, I'll go to Paul Doyen. I am writing to support the Bourbon Street Bike Taxi, New Orleans Pedicab Cooperative, and to urge the council to stop underwriting the current monopoly ownership of pedicabbing in the city. Tracy Camp. I support BSBT, NOPC, and I expect you to act in the interest of workers, citizens, tourists, and the French Quarter. You should stop protecting the interests of a few businessmen over the interests of the public. Patrick Fess. I support BSBT, NOPC, and urge you to act in the interest of workers, citizens, tourists, the French Quarter, and New Orleans Pedicab future in general. The market is big enough to support additional competition, and this will also help motivate the existing companies to strive to do better, to be better and more fair. Justin Moore, Bourbon Street Bikes. The monopoly on pedicab licenses held by Need a Ride, Bike Taxi Unlimited, and NOLA Pedicab is unfair. They raise rent without due explanation. There needs to be a fourth company that is held in common by the pedicabbers who share profits fairly amongst everyone. As a city, we need to set an example about fair and reasonable workplaces. And Bourbon Street Bike Taxi is attempting to do this by creating a collectively owned pedicab company. Please allow this company CNPCs and do not let this unfair monopoly continue. Okay, Shannon Gunther. I'm a single mom raising 4 children. I love to take them downtown, pedicabs, to all the wonderful restaurants I grew up going to, but do not feel safe staying downtown and walking the quarter. I believe is to be no longer safer. The safest we felt was over the holidays, taking pedicabs from a parking lot to a restaurant and after to a tour of the French Quarter. It is so devastating to see that we are losing the heart and soul of the French Quarter. Small businesses are closing. T-shirt and daiquiri shops are everywhere. Why don't we support the current 45 pedicabs and help them rebuild before considering another company? Okay, Gina Bardiacci. As a former pedicabber, I can say firsthand that there is and has always been plenty of room for additional pedicabs, especially on weekends and during events. It will benefit far more people in the city of New Orleans to open up the market for more pedicabs. Tourists, citizens visiting the French Quarter, workers, etc., will all benefit from increased supply. The only ones that truly benefit from closing off the possibility of more cabs are the owners of the current 3 companies. We are a city that is in desperate need of additional transportation. Please do not cut off opportunity for more people to earn a living on the pedicab. Please do not cut off additional supply for those in need of a ride. Okay. Carol Teton. My name is Carol, and I am here a concerned citizen and supporter of initiative to rewrite the pedicab ordinance with public input, proper research, and support from the pedicab riders and its community, and not only the ownership of 3 companies in town: Bike Taxi Unlimited, Need a Ride, and NOLA Pedicabs. It is important to me because I have seen loved ones struggle under this corrupt system. It is an unfair cash cow for privileged, well-connected owners. These workers have very little job security and are constantly pinned against each other in unethical ways. They have experienced increased rent without reasoning and face a fear of retribution when speaking out about unfair working conditions. As a voter and a member of this community, I must insist that you vote down this ordinance and table it for the incoming council to vote on, allowing time for the proper input and engagement that it deserves. I'm speaking on behalf of those who have been silenced. Okay, Adam Cohen. The proposed pedicabs resolution in New Orleans is New Orleans cronyism at its worst. In an attempt to sneak into law by an outgoing council rep who's attempting to stifle legitimate competition and create an eternal monopoly to benefit a single benefactor at the expense of the city and its citizens. It serves no legitimate public interest whatsoever, and if passed would doom legitimate business competitors who could give a vital service equal to or better than the current operators. There is no downside to voting yes. Okay. Jonathan Boyd, ladies and gentlemen of the council, in 2012, the same year pedicabs first graced the streets of New Orleans, the council voted to end a near identical economic model for taxi cab drivers. I think I read this one. Apologies, I'm gonna skip this one. I read that. It's a lot. Okay. Sam Lowry, dear committee members, the pedicab pilot report from May 31, 2013 by Malachi Hull is an easy blueprint to follow. I urge you to follow the report's recommendations and issue additional pedicab CNPCs. When I visit your town, I want to know that workers have a fair shake. All the way from Maine, I support Bourbon Street Bike Taxi, New Orleans Pedicab Cooperative, and expect you to act in the interest of workers, citizens, tourists, the French Quarter, and the earth, not only in the interest of current company owners. Lila Garrett. Hey, y'all. I am a pedicabber, and I think it's important that there's opportunity for riders to be owners of our own company. I think Bourbon Street Bike Taxi should be awarded permits, and the ordinance should be reviewed and finalized by the newly elected city council. There is no reason to limit the amount of pedicabs at this point, when there is an incredible opportunity for actual riders to have a say in how the businesses run. Tiffany Pittman, please leave finalizing the pedicab ordinance to the newly elected incoming council. Please award Bourbon Street Bike Taxi, New Orleans Pedicab Cooperative 15 CPNCs right away. Okay. Craig Richard, pedicabs should revert as much as possible towards self-ownership. For a city priding itself on promoting small business owners, There is only one possible way to go that supports the individuals. Working for oneself is not only an economic design of them earning more, empowering individuals with pride and decency instead of chaining them to an entity that wants its own cut. Cut for what? Schmoozing the right people does not entitle them to a cut. What happened in the good old boy times can and should be addressed at this time. Make it right. Vote for something that's appropriate and conducive for our social ecology. Michaela Butts. My name is Michaela and I live in the Bywater, and I'm writing as a concerned citizen and supporter of an initiative to rewrite the Pedicab ordinance with public input, proper research, and support from the Pedicab riders and its community. And not only the ownership of 3 companies in town, Bike Taxi, Unlimited, Need a Ride, NOLA Pedicabs. This is important to me because I rely on pedicabbing to survive and thrive in the city. I have experienced job insecurity, increased rent without reasoning, and fear of retribution when speaking out about unfair working conditions. As a voter and member of this community, I must insist that you vote down this ordinance and table it for the incoming council to vote on, allowing time for the proper input and engagement that it deserves. I am speaking on behalf of those who have been silenced. Okay. Stephen Rose, regarding the discussion of the New Orleans Pedicab program and potential changes to pedicab services in New Orleans, I believe it is of the utmost importance that pedicab services not be controlled by a single provider entity, i.e. NOLA Pedicabs, to the exclusion of other ready and qualified pedicab service providers. Exclusionary monopolies do not serve the public interest, stifle market competition and innovation, and limit economic advancement and workforce diversity. In reviewing and revising regulations of pedicab services, the Council's Transportation Committee should expand the number of available pedicab licenses to end NOLA Pedicab's current insurance monopoly. In addition to expanding licenses, council regulation of pedicab services must cover not only accountability and safety, but also require openness, agency, access, opportunity, transparency, diversity, fair play, and free enterprise. This is why I strongly support and endorse the position of Bourbon Street Bike Taxi, New Orleans Pedicab Cooperative, to establish a pedicab cooperative similar to those found in other U.S. cities. The city of New Orleans, tourists, and the public will benefit from the expansion of pedicab licenses and resulting increase of pedicab service providers. Okay. I think that's been 30 minutes. Stephen Rose, I think that I'm gonna read one more, and I think that's 30.
Okay.
To conclude, Natalie Glastone Dye, council members and Transportation Committee. I am a concerned worker that supports the initiative to rewrite the pedicab ordinance with more public input and transparent triangulated research. I support a future ordinance that prioritizes the well-being of pedicab operators and their ability to thrive, rather than prematurely submitting an ordinance which seems to prioritize the desires of pedicab rental company owners who represent a very small contingency of all those actually at stake. This is important to me because I worked as a pedicab operator for many years and have many loved ones who continue to rely on the pedicab industry for their primary income. As an operator, I experienced and witnessed job insecurity, increased rents without sound reasoning, unreliable working conditions, and fear of retribution for speaking out about unfair conditions. I am concerned that by limiting the number of CNPCs to the current 3 pedicab companies, that the city is encouraging a monopoly that is dominated by white male owners. This seems counterintuitive to the work that was done in 2012 to eliminate the monopoly within the taxi cab industry. This also seems to contradict the city's goals for promoting more women and minority-owned businesses, i.e. disadvantaged business enterprise certificates. What is the logic in limiting the current number of allowed permits and CNPCs to the 3 current companies? How dare the city council limit the ability of pedicab riders to have proper input into an ordinance that dictates their ability to work in safe, equitable, and mutually beneficial capacities? Especially considering pedicab riders are a primary interface between tourists, local consumers, and our city's central business and cultural enterprises. The global pandemic has made these times even more precarious for workers, especially independent contractors like pedicab operators. Please do not add to their struggles by closing the door on their opportunity to expand the industry in ways that are mutually beneficial for the economic well-being of pedicab operators and local businesses and cultural enterprises alike. Let's thrive together. Please defer finalizing the ordinance until these concerns have been heard and properly addressed. Thank you. All right, I think that's
Great. You did well, Sheree. Thank you. I know there was a lot. We'll circulate all the pros and cons as well, so everybody knows going into tomorrow. Just I have a few comments to the public comment. I just want to reiterate a couple things. One is that it's absolutely within the city's interests to limit CPNCs in all industries, right? There always has to be a limit. That is something that the city does. They do it for cabs, they do it for tour buses, they do it all the way. And I think I kind of referenced that in the beginning. It's due to the use of having to regulate our public streets, making sure that's fair and equitable, and also promoting public safety. So that's really what this is about. The amendments that have been introduced are in no way to limit the expansion or the potential growth of an industry or giving out more CPNCs. What this effectively does is it puts it into permanency and then allows for it after a third-party analysis and a market study. I think what we've heard from both sides is that this should be based in a study to ensure if it should be expanded, how many the numbers should be, and then also how to promote the industry and to allow for expansion of other people into the industry. And really to be a thoughtful process to make sure that the small guy has the ability to expand. And I think by having this analysis that is done based on the true economy of it and the scale of it makes more sense. This council cannot make that determination. A future council cannot make this determination, nor can a future administration make this determination. But working together and having a third party do a market analysis and ensuring that both the operators, the owners, the business groups, the neighborhood groups are all involved in that process, that will set this program up for an expansion and make sure too that we can make an environment that is open to opportunity for all. And that's really what this is about. So I hope that y'all understand where we're going to. But with that being said, I also think now is not the time to expand anything within the hospitality industry, knowing the conditions that we have right now in the environment. And that is why we need a market analysis to see what it is, because we don't want to set anybody up for failure, quite frankly. All right, well, with that, do we have any other comments from, I was about to say from the dais, but from council members? Are there any questions or comments? No? All right, well, with that, I would like to have a motion to adjourn. Jared, Donna, Cindy.
So moved.
Moved by Councilmember Nguyen, thank you. Second by Councilmember Brissette. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition? Great. Well, thank y'all so much. I appreciate y'all, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
See you guys tomorrow.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Donna.